community requests and then kind of round it out going back through department budgets. Just a reminder to the community as well as the council that this is a workshop, so what we're doing is just gathering information, trying to see where we have consensus, identify areas that councilors have any concerns about, so that city manager can then prepare a final budget that will be presented to the council at our June meeting for review and approval. And that's the point at which we will be voting on the budget. So it's just helpful through this process that if we identify areas of concern and we build some of that consensus, it makes it easier for that budget to be developed and presented. So there's no voting, there's no formal positions. It's really about trying to get all of your questions, our questions answered tonight, and go from there. So that sound all right in terms of the focus? All right. Then let's begin with the library. And where we left, I forwarded you an email yesterday. Hopefully everybody saw it from the trustees in terms of some suggestions. I guess the first place, just to get all the information out and accurate, and Amy is here. Can we get a sense of, because one of the plans was about carry forward, that you have fund balance. Can you let us know what that looks like so we have a better sense of?
Yeah, so I projected, I went through our various line items, projected about a $60,000 carryover based on projected expenses between now and the end of the fiscal year. Most of that is COVID-related savings and then some delayed hirings that we did, so a lot of it's in the personnel line.
Amy, when you say COVID-related, is any of that money that has to be spent a certain way, or monies that cannot be spent a certain way?
No, to clarify, it was, we didn't spend as much because of COVID, so we cut back on some of our magazine subscriptions. We didn't have as much postage because we weren't mailing. So things that we did that were COVID specific, so I expect it to be a one-time underspending, but that was the reason. So.
And you came in, the budget you presented, you were proposing some cuts last time. What was that around 12,000?
$17,000 from last fiscal year.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. So if the council remembers, the place we were at with our discussion last time was that we had last year reduced the appropriations from taxes by $100,000 and had provided funding of $100,000 from the fund balance that the library had to make up that difference. And so that's where we ended our conversation in terms of where we stood with this fiscal year. So the proposals that were submitted to us, this was one of those proposals, was for the council to, the fund balance, remaining funds that are unspent from this year, to allow that to be moved over for next year. And then the remaining difference in terms of that the library has plans to make up the remaining difference. So if you take the 60,000 fund balance, you take the 17,000 that they already presented, they also have an additional plan that would result in about $35,000. So all told, that would reach that $100,000 reduction for taxpayers.
And what would our appropriation be?
So our appropriation would be the same as it was
Last year?
last year.
461,872.
Yeah, the 50,000 was floated as a potential in terms of meeting in the middle. So if we go back to where we were with 100,000, that's where the trustees had gone back, my understanding.
No,
Go ahead.
I have Ron's email in front of me, just to clarify. Trustees were looking at two different scenarios. One was the 50,000 to meet in the middle. The other was a $25,000 compromise, so it would be a $486,000, 872 appropriation, and then with the carryover.
And
And the
so
trustees
what would
are-
the number look like with the $50,000?
So
So they were proposing either an appropriation of 511,872 to meet in the middle, or 486,872 to do the 25%.
okay, so that's where I'm
With the carryover.
confused, because he also mentioned that either way, the stated goal of $100,000 would be met by either plan.
Yeah, that,
That's why I was saying.
right, yeah, I think, that's not how I calculated it, but, yeah, it would be $75,000 rather than 100,000. So I think he misstated that.
So if we went the middle of the road, the 50,000, what happens to that 60,000 fund balance?
So that was without the carryover, so that would be if city council decides not to carry over, that was what trustees had proposed to meet in the middle. If you're willing to carry over the $60,000, they had proposed a $25,000 compromise.
And same thing with the, if we went 25,000, either way, you're still looking to keep the 60K fund balance?
No, in the first scenario, they had decided they wouldn't keep, well, I'm sure they would agree to the 60,000 if you were willing to grant it, but yeah, they wanted to, and the trustees here could speak to that. But the first scenario would be they wouldn't, if you decided not to carry over, it would be the 50,000. If you did carry over, it would be 25,000.
Counselor Kaplan, did that answer your question?
Sort of.
I'm going to say no. So maybe let's work backwards from what we know from last year. The taxpayers funded $461,872 for taxpayer funds.
Correct.
The previous year, it was funded at a higher level. That reflected a $100,000 decrease in taxpayer funding. So that $461,872 is what was being proposed by the city manager, the manager's budget, to remain the same.
Correct.
And the proposal from the trustees now is one of two scenarios. One, carry over the $60,000 fund balance and the cuts that they've already made. And what we would do is, rather than cut 100,000, we would cut 75,000. So that's one proposal. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
You mean restore
Restore
25,000?
25,000, yes.
That's right, you're not cutting,
Yes,
restoring.
we would restore 25,000 under that scenario. The second scenario that they put forward is that we would restore $50,000, and they would then make up the other 50 through some changes that they would make with staffing and the existing cuts that were presented. Did I
Yes.
get that right?
Yep.
Okay.
And what happens next year? Like, we're gonna be doing this again.
Yep.
It's just that they're lucky enough to have a $60,000 fund balance this year. So if we run them that close to the vest, then we'll not have a fund balance next year, and we're gonna be talking about it all over again, so. And comparing this year's numbers with next year's numbers. So,
That's gonna. And that being said, you're gonna be doing this every year, same time, every year, after year, after year, after year. And it comes in and the numbers fall and you discuss what you feel is correct.
So, either way, under the 25K scenario, the taxpayer is paying $60 a head. And under the 50,000, it's $64 a head. And the out-of-town residents are paying $25.
For a card, that is slated to go up to $30 on July 1st. So we are increasing that.
There's just way, in my opinion, too much of a difference. And to put that much of a difference on the back of the local taxpayer to support, the users from all of the outlying areas, I could not support that. No way, no how.
And I will say we are continuing to work on it and continuing to work with the towns that we serve. I won't speak for the trustees, I personally feel that the library funding task force would be a wonderful way to move forward if city council is amenable to that, I think we can certainly use the help and work together to see how we can diversify funding further, work more with some of the towns and see what, how we can make it better. I think it's a process.
With all due respect, Amy, I've heard that for I don't know how many years now. And it's, sometimes you have to stop the bleeding. And I think this is one of those times.
And unfortunately, in asking those other towns, it's still at their whim to donate or not donate. See, a funding source is faulted to begin with. You can't force them to do it. So in a continued dependence on a non-dependable revenue source, it's never going to work.
That's where the challenge, and that is why library trustees introduced the card fee to provide another incentive. But it's been challenging, I will say, and
Yeah.
especially during COVID, it's been very challenging. So.
Unfortunately, whether you like it or not, whether you're trying to do get it from each individual town, I do think that it's probably time for you to accelerate the rates for the out-of-town users. Just inflate their price. If they're towns, then let the towns do what they want. Maybe reimburse them instead of us chasing the towns.
And that's something library trustees can certainly consider.
You could also consider fee for service for certain items. You already do that for the printing,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
But for, certain library services, that an Ellsworth card holder would get full carte blanche, maybe there's other items that could be charged by the item, à la carte, so to speak. And, if they wanted to pay a full price card, then they would get everything as well, so.
But whatever system they decide to come up with, the bottom line is what do we want to present this year in our budget? Do we stay at the 461, 872, do we go another 25?
Yeah, and I would raise, I guess, where I was not reading it correctly, I guess the question I have is, the trustees put forward a plan where they would not fill one vacant position, which was roughly about $35,000 of savings. So I guess I just wonder, if we have $60,000 of carryover funds for this year, why that wouldn't work in terms of carrying over the funds for that $60,000, and then moving forward with the plan in terms of that reduction of approximately $35,000, which brings, and they've already put on the table 17, that leaves the appropriations at the 461, 872, and provides resources to continue the discussion in terms of how to make up that 60,000 as they move forward.
But that 60,000 was due to COVID, because there weren't as many people going into the library, there wasn't as much labor demand, so they're not gonna have that continuously.
Oh, I agree. I think when we talked about with the COVID impact, is that it continues to allow that softer landing, so to speak, But it doesn't increase the appropriations, doesn't increase the taxpayer burden, and it provides some extra time to look at whether cards increase, whatever the solutions might be, because next year the appropriation is again 461, 872. I mean, that's been removed, and the 60,000 does not, the taxpayers have already contributed that. So moving it forward doesn't increase taxpayer burden.
But there's also contract obligations there's mandatory increases in salary, and then when that happens, you're gonna automatically have increases in the retirement, in the social security, et cetera, so it's not gonna be exactly the same next year.
Well, but that's a different budget in terms of the base budget. In terms of that $100,000 that's been removed last year, that continues this year as well, under the scenario.
And just to clarify too, the full-time position, it is a circulation position, working our desk. So if we eliminated a full-time position, we would have to cut our hours, cut some of our services. So there is an impact there. And it can have a cascading impact, so we might get fewer people from other towns who want to use the library. And of course, we're providing less services to Ellsworth residents. So it's not an ideal scenario. It happens to be the vacant position we have right now. We might be able to make it work to make that position a part-time position, but, so there's a trade-off there if we did just cut that position out of our budget.
If you raise the price $50 for a card, you probably won't have half as many people coming, so you won't need as much help to run the library, because I think $50 people are just gonna say,
Still.
they're just not gonna do it, right?
And
They
even
probably
though-
squawk when you charge them 25, right?
Yeah, a lot of them do. Yep.
I'd leave the funding the same.
I'd give the 25.
Poll and see.
Yeah,
I just feel like they're right up against it anyway, because, you can't win with any situation.
but
The
I,
library just gonna keep dwindling down to nothing until nobody goes and they just shut the doors? Is that what people are thinking, or
no,
It's not going-
then you gotta fund it, right?
It's not, well, that's not what I'm thinking, but I also would say that I think that as a service for the community and as a valued service, there is a reality that other businesses and people in this community have faced and are facing right now. Many businesses have had to cut positions and have faced the very same issue of how do we trim costs? How do we manage through this? And so I think we have a responsibility to the taxpayers to manage the city's financing in the same way and raise legitimate questions. And to me, it's not about, we can disagree, and there is disagreement about if you reduce it, do you cut the value of it? If it end up cutting hours for the library, is that a reduction to the community? My answer is I don't know. I don't know. When I hear that 34% of the card holders are from Ellsworth and the remaining come from outside, I think there's room there to talk about this, and this is where we don't get to have that sense. We don't have any data about that. We've been raising this and we've been talking about it year after year, yet we don't have any hard facts to be able to answer those questions. And so for me, it's finding, the only thing we have that's data is how much we pay, how much the taxpayers contribute. And when Councilor Grindle did research and compared like communities that have public libraries and the cost per citizen, we were on the high end. And that's all that I've seen that is factual data. So I don't want to make cuts that is going to jeopardize the value that the library has to the community. And I think that some of these things that we're talking about, being able to move it $60,000 forward and asking the library to find the remaining cuts is not going to put the library in dire straits, is not going to end the value for the community, and it gives more time to look at future years and hopefully come up with more data so that the future council next year will be sitting here with some other data to weigh decisions. That's kind of where I sit, and by allowing that $60,000 to move forward is a very significant amount of funding, and is more than what we talked about last week when we said, well, let's restore 50. We're talking about restoring 60 and allowing the rest to be made up however the library wants to do it, and they have control over the line item. So that's where I sit. That's what I'm thinking about as we go into next week, and certainly want to hear from everybody else, and just kind of go down the line, if you don't mind, so that we can.
Well, also you have to think, you said the 60,000 was due to COVID because of whatever you had.
COVID
to
and
make
delayed
the
hirings.
expenses.
Yep.
But you also told us that you didn't have the opportunity to make the revenue either. So I don't know if you can make up the 60,000 in revenue next year.
That's
or
gonna be
not.
hard, yeah.
I agree with Dale as well, 60,000 carryover, and then continue to have the discussions going forward, how to gauge it and the effects.
I agree with Councilor Phillips, leave it where it is.
Yeah, leave the appropriations where it is and allow the 60,000 carry forward.
Council Kaplan.
I would do the 60,000 plus the 25.
I'm pretty much on the lines with Councilor Kaplan.
Okay.
So what did you get?
Well, what we have is, this will obviously be presented as part of the budget. We'll ask the city manager to present the budget based on, you've heard this discussion, and what will happen as with the entire budget. We'll have an opportunity as a council to make motions, to formally vote on scenarios and what's put in front of us.
But tonight, we're trying to set this so he has it. So did we decide it stays at 461, 872, plus he carries the 60? Was that the 4? You need 4 votes.
Well, I think the consensus, obviously, at the table is that, based on what was just discussed. That's why I said to, city manager has heard it. And as we look at it next week, the budget will come forward, and there'll be an opportunity for further discussion and dialogue, and that's when we will formally vote, so. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I add a couple of things?
Sure, please.
I'm Ann Lusby, and I'm a member of the Board of Trustees at the library. On behalf of the trustees, we wanted to express our appreciation to the council for considering these different options. This has been a very difficult year for everybody, not just the library. And secondly, we wanted to assure the council, the community, that regardless of the outcome of your vote, the trustees, Amy, and the staff will work diligently to keep our library relevant and a vital part of this community. And to follow up on the task force and getting more information, that has been a huge part of our discussions at trustee meetings. This was the first year that we put this new system in place, and then COVID happened, as we discussed at our last meeting, which absolutely cut us off from all town meetings, if they were even held, or any discussion. So we will be revisiting our plan, because we know that we've got to be able to have a dialogue with these outlying communities in order to get more accurate information. And we've been unable to do that. So I simply want to assure you that we are totally on target, that we need to rethink what we've been doing as well. And there have been good parts of it, and there have been some that we need to rethink. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on to roads.
Pave them all.
Paper. So Jen provided some additional information for us that we have requested in terms of looking. There should be, you should find this document. It's City of Ellsworth Road Construction Project Summaries FY 2021 as of 5/27/2021. Was at your seat when you arrived. So, might be best to have either Lisa or Jen kind of walk us through this.
Jeans. You got it?
Good evening. I guess we'll start at the beginning. So as of FY20, you'll see the ending balance was $570,000. I will say that the year prior to that, it was larger than that even, and we spent quite a decent amount in FY20 on roads and brought it down to the 570. Then you got the FY21 appropriation, which would be a total potential fund available of 1.2. We've spent about, or will, because we're still in the process of doing FY21 paving and other things, because I was not allowed to spend any FY21 money until about 2 months ago. So we will eventually spend about 408,000 of that FY21 local roads budget. You will see that we have about 29 almost thousand encumbered from previous years for the Water Street drainage project engineering. That was a project that we've had some issues with getting easements, as well as the DOT deciding to do the bridge adjacent to it over the course of 2 different seasons, which delayed us being able to get in there because you can't have 2 projects back to back. So that's encumbered to continue to go forward so that we can hopefully do that project this fall. And then you will notice Jen and I went through a bunch of the old projects that have been sitting on the books for years, totaled about $67,000 that was encumbered, that we're asking to be unencumbered and just put back in the fund to be used for other projects.
So with all of that, the restoration of the 67, the projected expenditure of 408, that 839,923, that's what you're projecting of having a carry forward balance.
Correct. That's if you unencumber the old projects with $67,000, yeah.
Including the 436 sidewalk repair.
That was from like 2015. I'd have to look at what it was.
What sidewalk was that? Which hole in the sidewalk anyway?
I honestly don't know.
So if I'm looking at the updated recommendations, I see 673,000 for roads. So
Sure,
we would have that covered.
if that's what's in there. I have it somewhere in here. So the plan that I gave you last time was for like over, what, $1.5 million, I think. So Or I guess I didn't give it to you, the one I explained that I had potential. I have it somewhere, I just can't find it in front of me. Oh, okay. Yep.
Well, no, that's total capital improvements, so the roads would be the 673, 700, so we, what's that?
653,
The traffic camera, okay.
so that would put you just shy of 1.5. 1,493,623, if you take the
Okay, so.
total surplus of 839,923 plus the requested 653,700, it gives you $1,493,600.
So that's what we're looking to do, is to have that, the 1.4 as road improvement
Right,
budget.
so here's the other
Okay.
thing to keep in mind with that, so even if you allocate that much, right? We don't actually or in the past, we've never actually spent that much. So if you allocate 600,000, I would get to spend 400,000
In the past.
in the past. Correct. So that is why there's a good, that makes up a lot of that $800,000. It's not because Project didn't get done, it was each year $200,000 was kept back, and eventually it adds up. So, we still, in my opinion, need to keep some sort of reserve. So if you do the 600 and the 800, I would still only potentially spend 1.2, right? Because you want to keep a couple $100,000 as a not a rainy day fund, but something, an emergency fund.
So what, I guess the question I have is, should we be looking at establishing a roads reserve fund and maintain that, so that, at 200,000, I would defer it in terms of what makes sense, have that established. If it's not touched each year, you don't have to add anything to it. You could if there's another project. But why not establish a separate fund using some of these carryover funds to create that account, so that as we move forward, we have that built in, and then have the set amount that is going to be projected to be expended. We shouldn't, again, I don't think we should be having taxpayers contribute to projects. We have enough projects for roads. It's a major issue. We heard of one last week. We should be using those funds each year that we appropriate to do the work. So if we start that process, then we always have that reserve account, and we move forward with projected projects that you come forward and say, yes, we can reasonably get these done this year, this is the projected cost, and we start moving on those and start meeting that demand.
I definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's ambiguous, there's maybe about 200,000 we might not spend this year. I like to have a reserve account with a definite amount of money in it that would move forward every year. And spend the amount of money we've authorized to spend.
It's probably not, it's a good idea, and it wouldn't be that difficult. If you got basically we got 1.5 million, and you're gonna use it as a bumper anyway, let's start an account, move the 100,000 in it this year. Because if it all goes out the window, we can always transfer it back. So then, that gives her some leeway to go and take care of the funds that are there. If you wanna do 100, do 150, whatever you want, create the account. But then you utilize the rest. You need, for the big project on.
475,000 for
How much?
475 for
Yeah, so
Christian Ridge.
you need a half a million out of this for that, our share.
Correct,
So
and
that would still-
and then it won't actually be it'll come to council this month, but we won't actually, or we went last month. We don't actually spend that money, right? But it'll be committed, so
Yeah.
it'll carry over for the next 2 years, but it's committed.
But you need a $500,000 for that, so that still leaves you 600 to easily spend on other projects. Which maintenance paving, I see is very reasonable. That's gonna chew up another 200,000 or 300,000 this year, because that's gonna be up, so.
Lisa,
idea.
where are we with Beals Avenue Engineering? I know we've talked about it for, it seems like decades now.
We're asking to unencumber that because I don't know that we have any plans to move that forward anytime soon. And if we did, then we could go back out to get
Has anything been,
nothing's been done to my knowledge since like 2014 or before that.
is there any kind of engineering plan or of any size sitting on a shelf someplace?
No, it's preliminary, like survey, that's it. I thought there was, but it's not. It's very, very basic.
And my second question, we have the potential for a $100,000 coming up next month for our share of a path extension. Does that come out of your budget, or is that another?
The discussion that the Economic Development Director and I had was possibly a 50-50 split between local roads and TIF if possible. But that's
Okay, that's still
it.
in the conjecture
Yeah, that's not
stage.
baked into the
Okay.
cake yet.
Other comments?
So with that budget, towards the end of next year, you're not gonna run out of money or anything, right? You're gonna have plenty to keep everybody going and still getting some projects done that need to be done.
Yeah, this isn't highway, so highway has its own separate budget to keep them busy. Most of this is contractual paving, contractual signage, signals, gonna do some crack treatment. Most of it's stuff we hire out.
You mentioned signals, and I know we've talked about having the engineering coming and timing the lights.
Signal timing plans, yep.
Yes. Are those in here? by
It's
any
in Jason's
chance?
budget.
That's, yeah,
Okay,
it's
I thought-
Jason.
okay. And that is scheduled this
budget,
year,
yeah.
okay.
To have a study done.
Oh, it's just a study. It's not an
Well,
actual fix or,
They'll come in and do a study and then they can adjust the timing.
okay.
Right, we've had one done not that long ago, but I think
I
it
thought we
weren't,
had,
I think when I
but-
first started, so 2-3 years ago or so, he would be able to tell you better,
You
but,
might run in here.
but I think there's some that could be looked at.
yeah. Yeah, I'm really finding it
Yeah.
frustrating.
6 o'clock in the morning, you gotta get away from me.
Just go.
Just go.
Yeah.
Oh, just go. Is that okay, Glenn? Is that okay?
Oh,
One
that's
by
not
Walgreens
right.
is horrible.
Yeah, the one by.
And just
6
remember,
o'clock.
municipalities do not get the money from the tickets that you're,
Which reminds me.
goes to the state.
Counselor Kaplan? yes.
Speaking of signals, are there any plans to put a light at the end of 179?
DOT has done a study on that intersection and it is on the cusp
But
of
not there.
light or no light.
Oh, there's gonna be a major accident.
Oh, yeah.
there.
The opinion at this point is that the light, the
light-
traffic data, the accident crash data is low enough to say that it's not justified. Traffic volume is such that it's, again, right on the cusp of, yes, it needs a light, no, it doesn't need a light, according to the DOT statistics.
Did the
Those
We
who
just
DOT
gotta wait
drive
till
it-
somebody has a
Those who
fatality.
drive it every day, no otherwise.
Did they take into account too, though, the 3 new developments in Waltham that are going in?
Well,
No.
This,
The
'cause
other-
this was done a year ago.
Yeah, I know.
Right, and the
Yeah.
other thing to consider, and they take into consideration, is when you put in a stoplight, the number of rear end accidents go up
Increase. yeah.
because you have people stopping. It's a 45, 40, I don't know the speed limit through there, to be honest, 40, 45,
40.
and then you're coming to a stop. And so when you put a light in, the number of rear end accidents go up. So that plays a factor into it too.
I just look for the
So to
ones
answer your
from
question, the city could decide to put a light in there in the DOT. It reaches the DOT's threshold. The DOT doesn't have any intention at this point of installing a light, so it would have to be a city
Yeah,
financed event.
I just see people just, the other day I came up that road, took me 20 minutes to
Oh.
get off that road at peak hour. And I
Every
was not
day.
happy.
Every day.
Is a challenge. I mean, you gotta be a stunt driver to get out of it sometimes. And people are waving at you with a finger on each hand.
Oh, yeah, no,
I know.
yeah.
It's dangerous.
I'd turn right, I wouldn't turn left out of that
Screaming
road if
at
I was
ya.
coming out of there. I'd turn right and go Christian Ridge to get wherever I had to go. I would not put
It's,
my life in my hands and turn left out of that road.
And you said there's 3 new developments going in?
Oh, yeah, 136 lots.
Yep.
And what are we
Walmart.
waiting
Selling
for?
like
Well,
crazy.
some of that old Henderson property being redone?
Henderson's, yeah, which half of them went back to the previous owner this year, and they sold a bunch more last weekend, and they're gonna sell a bunch more next weekend, so.
So that potential would increase traffic volumes, which could throw it over the threshold
Yeah,
to
I'm
make
sure it
DOT.
would. Potentially,
But-
but the DOT would have to do another study.
Right.
So, Lisa, last week you presented, you have your projects all mapped out and the costs and all of that. One of the things, and especially for me in light of the request that we heard about in terms of the road, the highest priority roads that people have are the roads they live on.
Correct.
And so it's never ending. And I think we all understand that. So one of the things I think is really important is if we can communicate to the public in terms of what those projects are. So, like you said, costs you can project, and then things might move up on the list, or we might run out of money because of the costs go up. But I think giving the public that sense of, okay, these are the projects, but also creating the opportunity for the community to come together to present, and I do think that that's something that we should include with the budgeting. So what I'm, long way of asking is, can you have that submitted as part of the budget, what those projects are, so that we can have that as part of the public presentation, so that people know what we're talking about, and that we're not just appropriating the $1 million+ that we have some sense of what the projects are going to be, recognizing that they may change throughout the year.
So, short answer, yes. Long answer is, this year we didn't have a local roads committee. Previously, last year, we had the local roads committee meetings, to which the local roads committee essentially voted and presented to the council a list, which is the way I would hope to go back to next year. So yes, essentially yes, but it's going to be not just my list, it's council and some citizens and a process, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. No, I think using the local roads committee to also hear from citizens, to be able to pitch their projects, to be able to justify it, like we heard in the council, because it's really hard sitting here and hearing the condition of the roads and those requests, but not having any real concept of how does that need match up with this, and the local roads committee can dive into that with your guidance and everything. So I think that's a good plan.
Correct, and the hard part is, and which is fine, and we can always do that, is we're obviously gonna request more than we potentially are gonna get funded, right? So that request may be larger, and thus what we actually do that year wouldn't be what's in there, but it is what it is.
But based on this 1.5 that we're looking at right now, we will provide projects that will get done, we plan to get done within that amount of money
So
for
do
this
we,
budget.
do we have them create the count?
I
So
think,
it's
is there
1.4.
pretty much consensus to have a reserve account created?
Yeah, so we've got 1.4 to work with. We'll put 100,000 in the reserve.
In the last 2 or 3 winters,
Yep.
what would you say the average winter expense has been for unforeseen breakdowns, frozen pipes, burst pipes, whatever the reason may be. Will 100,000 be enough?
So, most of that smaller stuff just comes out of the highway budget,
Okay.
honestly. Like, if it's a culvert pipe, we've got one out back, and we just take one and go, and it came out of either highway or local roads. This 100,000, I think it's on the low end of where I'd like to be. If it was 2 years of 100,000, and next year you get, if it's 100 this year and 100 next year, I think we'd be a little safer. The 200,000 for me, or my thought process, is if something happens with a bridge, right? Like, or a box culvert, or something bigger than just a failed section of road. A failed section of road, highway can basically make that work in a small dollar amount. But those bigger culverts, box culverts and bridges, and that's not highway department fixing it, that's an RF Jordan or a bridge specialist or someone that I'm gonna have to pay more specialized work to do. That's what to me, that safety net's for.
Council Grindle.
It's the same thing as if the fire department was preparing, you'd have $600,000 reserved, because we couldn't think of all the things that could possibly happen. We better have money saved for it, so. All you can do is put a couple $100,000 away, cross your fingers, and if it doesn't work, then you're back here having a meeting, figuring how you're gonna pay for that extra $250 you needed. So,
Wouldn't be the first
I
time.
think we work within what we have for a mill rate and what we have for a budget, so. That's a step in the right direction, gives us a little leeway.
Council Grindle?
I'm leaning more towards 200,000, just because we have the 839 carrying forward already, so, and that still would leave us with 1.3, 1.2.
Which is a solid year of
Which
getting
is
stuff done.
huge, and we're probably not gonna be able to spend all that anyway in the next 12 months to get it done, to get the work done. I don't know, I know it's hard
We
to
can
get
try like heck.
paving. We can try, absolutely, but I think 1.2 solid, and I would feel more comfortable. We have it now, so why don't we just put it aside, and then going forward, we don't touch it.
I agree
We're
with
done.
Councilor Green, yes. Yeah, I agree with you.
Lisa, I have one question on the 500,000-ish for our portion of the Christian Ridge.
Yep.
Does that have to all come out of this year, or could we do 250 this year and 250 next year? Or do we have to,
Council didn't commit to a specific year, we just said it'd come out of local roads funding. So I'm guessing you probably could do it over 2 years if you wanted to. So you
That
could,
free up
another 250.
250,000 more in this 1.3 million?
That's where Dale's plan of listing them all out, when you think you might be able to get them done,
Yep.
and budgeting them out.
Yep, and
over
I mean, I
next-
have it, I can get it all to you,
Yep.
just for voting purposes next month.
I think this is that one area where we all know that we haven't been able to address some of the issues and kind of move things along slower. Taxpayers are paying for it, and being able to get to those projects will make a big difference. People will see it, people will know that their dollars that they're spending for taxes are going to something that is needed, so.
That's awesome. And another thing you could do is, after we freed up that $436 from the sidewalks, is actually send somebody out and do a $436 repair somewhere in the sidewalk, send Mark the picture, he'd be so happy.
I believe that was sarcasm.
I could do it with leftover.
All right, anything else on the roads?
We would want to look at 100,000 or 200,000 transfer.
It looks like there's consensus for around 200.
200,000 vote.
Yeah.
It looks like 200 and then build the rest of the budget around that. And again, we'll have a discussion, further discussion.
I had just an FYI on my plan, I had 200,000 so it works. I don't have to change
Make it
my
easy, you don't
spreadsheet.
have
If it's there now, keep it now.
Okay, we ready to move on?
Do you need your page back, Jen?
Next one is just larger item of capital, so we've heard a lot of the capital items that's been presented, the budgets have been put forward. Do we have additional questions about what's been put forward? Has anything new developed on the city side that we need to revisit?
So the sheet that you have now has been cleaned up. So the only items in here are capital requests for FY22. The items that had been in the other sheet that were previously authorized and were in the bond that were never purchased have been taken out. And so what you have in front of you is specifically just FY22.
I see under the water department, you still have both Surrey Road project and treatment plant lagoon system in there.
Yeah, so, where did I put that? So Reggie reached out to the individual who did the rate study previously. When we recently just did it, and I printed out the email. No, I can't find it. But he, and Reggie's here, so, feel free to
He looks happy to be here, too.
correct me if I'm misspeaking, but the general consensus of that individual was that it would be about $4,000 to do a new rate study.
Yep.
I think is correct, and that based on his, again, estimations, that to do both projects, you would be looking at approximately a 25% rate increase to fund both, to afford to do both the Surrey Road and the Lagoons project. So the question I would pose to the council, and obviously that's a process, because we gotta go to the PUC and get it approved, and everything, so it's not something that we can approve to happen right away, but I guess the proposal would be, do we go through the process, rip the Band-Aid off, go for the total of, to do both projects and have a one-time significant rate increase? Or do we go down the road of prioritizing these two, both extremely important projects, one more important than the other, go through the process of a rate increase, 10 to 12, 15%, only to have to turn around and do it in a year or two when we now prioritize the other project as being a priority, so.
So using that 25% scenario, Reggie, then you have a basic rate with a low rate or whatever you call it,
The minimum?
minimum. How much is that? Would it go from A to what?
So that I'm not sure. The last rate increase, we did a 10% increase, and it raised the minimum to, it was a $5 increase. So
What is the minimum now?
$65 for 900 cubic feet.
25% increase on that?
Not much. That I don't know. I don't know the number.
$16. 16 per
I
quarter.
mean, how much is 900 cubic feet of
$65
water?
a year.
Yeah, 25%.
Multiply that by 7.5.
Well, if you had like a 3-bedroom house, say a family with 3 kids, and, you know, they're all taking showers and they're doing everything, I mean, what's the bill gonna be at the end of the month? Is it gonna be $100 for?
The average
or
home.
What is it, 6 months?
3 months. So it's for
3
3
months,
months of
so-
water.
What would that, like, translate to for that family to pay, like, say, the way it is right now, and then afterwards, it's gonna be,
So the average home doesn't meet the minimum.
it doesn't.
It doesn't meet the minimum.
Even with, like, kids and everything, it doesn't.
How old are they? If they're teenagers, it
Well,
exceeds.
Yeah, it's no, I mean, I think that makes a big difference on 25%. I mean, if it's $15 every 3 months, or if it's $100, you know, I mean, if it's $15, $20, I don't see what the problem would be.
The general consensus is, though, the more water you use, the cheaper it actually gets. So once you get over that minimum, the actual fee that you pay for that is cheaper. That figure I don't have either. I can get it though.
Well, it's gonna, I mean, it's
I mean,
gonna
I
be
have
more
it.
than $67, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So,
But And we're talking a substantial raise, and one thing comes to mind, we've just got a new fairly large, important contributor to the system. What does this mean to the Jackson Lab? And their water usage? I assume that they have a pretty steep bill every month or quarter.
They do have a pretty substantial bill. They use a lot of water.
But it's cheaper the more they use.
It is cheaper than what they use
Per gallon.
per gallon.
Reggie, did you say the average user does not use the 900
Cubic feet.
cubic feet?
Yeah, they don't go over that minimum charge over 3 months.
Do you at your house?
Jesus, my wife and I, we must have a leak.
You might.
Well,
I mean,
Guy on the Buckspot Road had a leak, right?
consistently, I mean, quarter after quarter,
Which one?
it was 1,200 cubic feet that we use.
So 900 cubic feet is 6,732 gallons.
that help?
You probably watering your lawn too
Did it
much.
help you?
Do you have a question?
Watering your lawn too
I
much.
just have a statement.
Councilor
I
Grindle?
wish.
I mean, these really aren't optional. You know, this isn't
Right.
an
Not really.
optional thing that we're gonna do. It's,
Not really.
we have
If
to
we
do
wait
this,
for
so.
the,
May not be optional, but timing is part of it as well.
Well, yes,
Yeah.
yes. So, and I think we talked about before, kind of getting a consensus or some more information on which one needed to be done first and what that rate increase would be potentially. I think that's what you had mentioned, which I think is a good idea. I mean,
So. Yeah, that's true. So I'd say, personally, we're sitting there arguing about this, talking about it. I think probably by the time we get ready for our budget meeting, maybe you better leave that and have us, or sometime between now and then, come up with some scenarios of the 25% increase doing everything and what the water rate, what it's gonna mean to the people on the other side, from the low end user to the high end user. So if we I think from what you said, the plant lagoon is number one. That needed to be done because you're feeling the pressure. So that means the Shore Road project could be put off. But still, if we do both, 25%, let's see what it is, and then some kind of a graphic on what happens if you do only the treatment plant, what the rate increase would be, and you delay it a year or two. But we need something in writing, something we can, not writing,
Right.
something visible, tangible,
right.
not guesswork.
and in fiscal year 26, we will have a bond drop off. That only gains us $8,400.
Yeah, so, there's the different scenarios, it would be nice to see.
What happens, say, the bill goes up, somebody really can't afford, what do they do about that? I'm assuming that.
There is a process.
There is a process, so we send out, we call it a friendly reminder. The guys go out with a notice, door to door. You've got X amount of days to pay whatever the bill is. From that time, if they cannot pay it or they think they cannot pay it, and they call Amanda, our utilities clerk, we will do a payment arrangement. That payment arrangement is good for that quarter only. So if they miss anything on that, then that turns it into a disconnect. But if they can maintain that order, that agreement, and then the next quarter comes, they can then add another payment arrangement.
Well, I guess I'm just wondering if they can't afford it this quarter, they're probably not gonna be able to afford it next quarter. And, I mean, what happens if it really puts the burden so highly on somebody, they just can't afford to live in that house or whatever anymore, you
But
know?
it sounds like what he's telling you, if they can't afford it, they're not gonna have any
Yeah.
water.
Ultimately, then we disconnect their service.
And that is by state statute, or is that a local ordinance?
Main PUC.
That's what I thought.
The same
Well,
thing
and
was,
then your electric, can't afford your electric, they shut you off.
yeah. And it's
I
the
mean,
same
some
thing.
people don't make
Gene, it's
enough
the
money
same.
to pay their bills as
Whether
it
it's-
is,
Whether we're
so.
talking water, sewer, or property taxes, the same at the end. If you don't pay them, you end up losing your house, you end up getting water shut off, you end up getting, What happened to the sewer? What do you do?
We do try to not disconnect people for their water.
I think I'd like to hear from some people that are on the water system and see what their thoughts are about that bill going up.
So with the rate increase, that again, that has to go through the PUC.
Yes.
We have to, by law, hold a public hearing. They have 3 months, I believe, to contest
Yep.
with the main PUC.
That's
What-
the whole process of doing a rate crease. Like, a lot of the questions you're asking is the whole point of doing a rate case study, to see what he needs to maintain his system, how many users there are, how do you divvy that dollar amount over the high-end users and the low-end users, and that's the whole point of a rate case study, to get us to the point where we can say what we can and can't afford and how. And then it starts the process with the PUC and allows citizens' comments, and it does all that whole process with an accountant that we pay for.
Yeah.
So to,
And the other thing comes to mind, I don't know how we compare to other communities with water departments or what it is, and I
They're
assume
on
we're,
the low end.
we're still on the low end. And it would be, as the manager said, it would be easy to do it one time and be done with it. If we're gonna have to go up eventually, then bite the bullet and be passed, but put some stuff together, I think, and let's have something tangible to look at.
Yep.
the other piece that I think is important, if you could come and, just, for us to just say, well, we have to do a treatment plant lagoon system, for most people, that doesn't mean anything, and there's not a really good understanding, and I know this is, when I first came on the council 3.5 years ago, this was an issue then, and I remember touring the facility and you explaining exactly what that meant and why
Yep.
that needs to be done. If you could come to the meeting and just talk about that, because I think it's really important for people to understand what these projects are and how they relate to having access to clean water. Those are some of the things that you can't, there are certain things we have to do. And if we don't do those things, then there's a significant consequence, not to mention the access to the water, but also there's some other pressures associated with that. So I think the education, so that people understand why these projects are coming forward. And then it doesn't get done overnight. These are multi-year projects as well. And I think we should be looking for any kind of funding opportunities that might exist for some of these projects, and keep that front and center as well.
So the Story Road one is approved under the drinking water program for a potential funding source. I mean, it's a loan, it's not a grant, right?
Right.
But there is some potential, what's it called? Principal forgiveness, so there is some possibility of that. We have attempted multiple times on the treatment plant one with the drinking water program, and it just doesn't score high enough. So, yes, we can look at other potential funding options, but the specific drinking water ones are not gonna get us there.
Well, reality too is, we're kind of looking ahead and with the crystal ball, the longer we wait to do some of this and go out to try to get funding for it, there's, I think, a probably pretty significant chance that interest rates are not going to get lower. And we keep pushing it off, and that 25% increase is going to increase to 30 or more as we tack on higher interest rates down the road, so.
So just for clarity, going forward with the budget, we're gonna suspend these two items to be circle back around on after the budget's process? Is that?
Or I think by final vote, we need to know, I mean, if we can't, if we have some numbers between now and the final vote at the next meeting, then we can make a decision then. But, well, you can't do it anyway, because we won't have the approval for the rate, will we?
No.
Unless
Well,
we,
that's it doesn't affect the mill rate, right? So really, you could make the decisions after.
yeah.
Right.
But it doesn't affect the mill rate, but it does affect the process of, if there's a consensus to move this forward, it gives you the ability to start the process in terms of looking at a rate study and beginning that. Until we do that, you can't move forward with that. So I guess it's a matter of if you feel like you're ready to do that and you need that authorization, then I would bring it for June. If you feel like you're not ready, that there's some other preparation, then we can push it out beyond the budget where it doesn't affect the mill rate. But I'm thinking that you probably want the authorization to be able to start that planning work.
So for the lagoon portion, the plans are done. Wood and Kearns had them completed, I believe mostly completed. We have the budget figures for that. So that portion of it is taken care of.
But they want number that, rate.
Yeah, the rate.
Reggie, how long is the rate process? If you applied today to the
It'd be a
PUC,
couple of months.
That's all?
Yep. I think the last one we started in November, early to mid-November, and by January 1, it was in effect.
Really? I didn't realize it was that quick.
And I
You're
thought it took longer
surprising.
for the PUC.
I can't
I
imagine.
thought it was like a couple months with the PUC.
It was long, it's gotta be longer than that.
Pretty sure it was started
PUC
in
doesn't do
November.
anything quickly.
I'll look. But I was pretty sure November.
Not for the complete process, so I assume the accountant has to do his study, go through the meetings, then you have to ask Mother May I.
And then once we get it through you, as approval to a PUC, right?
Yep.
Has to get approval through council, then go to PUC.
Then PUC.
Yeah. Guess in more like 6 months.
Yeah, I think that's more within line of reason.
Anything else? Shall we let Reggie step back down?
Well, this
Yes.
truck, that truck, the 1 ton for 55,000, is that without a plow?
That is without the plow.
So you have to buy the plow, that's the top item.
Yeah, it's really
Okay.
tough, it's only 63.
Well, before he said that they had a 3/4 ton that needed the plow replaced, I don't know if they accidentally left that on there. I haven't priced a 1 ton lately, so I don't know.
We took the half ton off
Yeah, that's good.
and just came forward with what he needs. He needs
Yeah.
the 1 ton and the plow.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Under the highway department, the truck went up $3,000.
Yeah, the reason, you wanna explain that one, Jim?
So we had the one for 172 on there, which was actually approved through the bond. And so she had another one for 175, so we put that one on and took the one that was approved in last year's bond off.
Okay.
Do you know off the top of your head, do we have any significant retiring debt as we head into next year? Any old bonds that we've,
No, we had one for wastewater. It just paid off. Not really,
nothing significant? So one question, the ambulance, we have an ambulance budgeted, 175,000. So I just question about that, is that obviously, we have a contract for the next 3 years. Is this to be utilized, are we gonna be using it now as part of our service and response, or is this kind of to preparation to make a transition to?
It would be my intention to start using it as soon as we found a viable used ambulance and outfitted it, instead of using our rescue or the engine.
Okay.
That way, we could, if we got to a scene, we could get somebody out of their home. If we were waiting for an ambulance, we could get them inside an ambulance and do basic stuff until the transporting agency got there.
Yeah, at a crash scene, you can get them out of the weather.
Yeah.
You
Makes a lot
have
more
light.
sense to me than using the rest.
You can't take them to the hospital.
We can't transport, no.
Not
We're
yet.
not a transporting agency yet. That's what we're working towards.
And the wear and tear on the rescue versus an ambulance, it's just a no-brainer.
Yes.
What's the vision for when we'd be a transporting agency?
Well, that would
Well, we
have
have a
to be
three-year
part
We've
of
got a
contract.
3-year service agreement, so.
Yeah, I know. I don't like that.
That'll be for the next chief to put into
Yes,
motion.
that's the next guy's problem.
Wow.
Are there any scenarios where we could transport legally? If, for instance, if an ambulance was not in the area?
Wouldn't be right.
We don't have a
With a-
lot,
with a straight- with a straight face, I'd have to say no.
Yeah.
I guess.
we don't have
If
a
it's a life
license.
or,
Yeah,
if it's a
suicidal,
life or death
homicidal ideation,
situation.
you can transfer in a police car, so.
Well, I mean, if somebody's dying down on High Street, there's an ambulance 45 minutes away, or you've got one sitting on site with them out of the weather, I mean, you might as well take them
To me, those are extenuating circumstances that we would play on a case-by-case basis, and
Yeah.
if we
And
had to
you'd
take
still
on
have
that,
to
we
have
would.
like ACLS certifications and things like that if somebody's actually dying.
Yeah, I guess.
It's great.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
it-
that's what, I was just wondering.
Right.
if you
Now,
would be the-
in lieu of becoming a full transport agency, we can become, I'm talking baby steps, you can be a secondary transport agency. So if an ambulance isn't available, and we have that scenario on High Street, we could transport.
There you go.
So,
It just has to change our license.
Yeah, it'd be a change to the license. But it would be a step in the process of being a full transport agency.
Right, yeah.
where do you buy stuff like ambulances? Freddie's Ambulance Company? I mean,
No, there's companies out there that sell used ones. There's Autotronics in Bangor. They're all the
That's
time
right,
taking
I've
in
been-
used ambulances. There's a place called Brindley Mountain. You might have seen it when we were looking at rescues and stuff. They broker, they're a broker for fire departments that are selling, or ambulance companies that are selling
Yeah.
ambulances.
so you said Autotronics, right, it's in the industrial part in Bangor? Or whatever it is, the one in Bangor?
Yeah, I think it's out on Outer Hammond Street.
Wait a minute, but
Farm
did they
Road.
actually do conversions, or I've seen them there, I never paid, and I've never thought it through, so.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
they have.
They do conversions?
I do believe they do.
Huh,
Conversions to what?
ambulances? Is
From-
that,
from
are they
what?
are a dealer?
Yeah. They do remounts and they sell used ambulances and.
Huh, cool. Geez, local, that'd be a shame.
I thought it was a radio outfit for cars, electronics.
Council Craig?
Okay, so I'm looking at the bond that we took out in 2019. That was that $3 million bond, and in that, we approved the rescue truck for $550, correct?
Well, yeah, but then when it came forward, you shot it down.
Right.
Right,
so
but
the
the money's
money's
still
still
there.
Yes.
Okay. And there were some other things included in that $3 million bond that
Yes.
have not been spent.
A vac
Correct.
truck.
Lisa's truck,
Wasn't-
one for $172,000.
Right, so we took that out, but you're gonna
Okay.
expend that.
And that super sucker, was that in there as well?
Yeah.
Well, we're gonna, after the budget process, we're gonna come back with the bond issues, the bond items. Because we need clarity on the council, because there are certain items, like the vac truck, that we have to reappropriate those funds, because
I mean, that was 400.
the original cost of the rescue was 5-something, but they pared that down to 3-something. So we're gonna be bringing those items back after the budget process. This is just capital for FY22.
Okay. But there may potentially be funds available,
Vac truck?
or you're gonna use all the 3 million, you think?
Save water.
Well, I mean, that's, yeah, I mean, I suppose there will,
Shop back and ship 'em.
depends on the the
Right.
priorities of the council, yeah.
Do you know how much is left unspent of that 3 million? And
Most of it.
what's,
Most of it, yeah, we haven't spent much of it at all
We
because.
spent 100 and some thousand on the radio system.
well, a portion of it's the
Some of it's
the,
gotta get moved now. There's stuff that got charged to highway equipment that should have come out of loan.
Huh.
Like the first plow truck.
Cool.
I
Do you,
just-
any other questions? You don't,
oh,
you can-
sorry.
you can sit down, I just stopped.
Well, I'm wondering if we swap out the rescue for the
No, I see where you're going.
for the
with that.
ambulance,
Yeah, me
but
too.
Well, I think it's a very good question in terms of how we pay for this new capital is part of the discussion in terms of, is the thought that we're going out to bond for all these items? What is the thought in terms of that? And so if we have existing dollars that we're not going to use, with some of that rolled into that,
Right there.
just understanding how we intend to acquire this, all of these items would be important to know. You don't think so? It's just gonna be magic? It's just gonna-
Yes, Keith, what are we gonna talk about? We moving on here? Heather had a pretty good list. You gonna start whipping off yours?
Does that make,
Yeah.
does that make sense to you in terms of, for the budget presentation to come back and be able to talk about that? When you look at all the items that were initially in the 3 million, you have some ideas already about how you plan to spend it, and to be able to say, okay, we're gonna be able to spend, we have 2.7 million allocated, so we have 300,000 more. And then you can look at this list and say, okay, we're gonna use the bond for this, which reduces the capital expenses that we need to cover going forward. Is that
That's-
kind of?
Right,
Yeah.
that's what you do.
right.
Yes.
We can do that.
I'm just curious, whether we're gonna have Josh say yay or nay to any of this.
He can't say yay or nay yet.
Oh,
I'm sure he'll weigh in. Yeah, there's ways for him to share his opinion that would be very helpful. I can see him making notes out of the,
Yes.
all night he's been making notes.
Yes.
Good thing.
okay, other questions about the capital items? No? Yeah, you, Council Blanchard?
I have an addition I wanna make, but it's not capital.
Well, the floor is yours.
We voted in December for code enforcement to look at some of these buildings and take legal action on them. And he said at the time that he needed funding for it. Right now, there is no funding that's been proposed for it. And he would be looking at $12,000 to $15,000 to start having money to take legal action on some of these buildings. And I just don't want to see us pass an ordinance, but not pass any money, allot any money to enforce it. So,
I
Council Caplan?
thought that we were going to be billing the person if the property was sold, that the person who was non-compliant with the code would be billed for that,
and that.
not the taxpayer.
Right, but we need money up front
We-
to begin the process.
We put 12,000 in code enforcement.
You did.
For,
In this budget?
Today.
We did.
Today, it's reflected in your new sheet.
reflected
Oh.
in the new sheet.
Okay, I haven't seen it then.
And also,
Just in the total sheet, that's somewhere.
All right, thank you.
if I remember right, the description and what we thought and voted on at that meeting, we were simply including state existing law. in it.
Yeah.
That isn't like a green light to go ahead and start doing it. It was a clarification of the ability to do it. It wasn't a green light for the men upstairs to start going out and tearing houses down either.
Right, that's what I thought.
That was the ordinance. I'm talking of the meeting this past December, when it was first proposed. And that's when the code enforcement officer said that he would need some money
Yep.
to begin doing that.
Yep, but the only change to the ordinance was adding the already existing state law.
Correct. And now that it's an ordinance, then it would have to be followed.
No, it just clarifies the ability to do it, it doesn't have to be followed. It does, I mean, you don't have to start acting on it as part of the ordinance, it allows you, it gives you a guideline. That doesn't mean you start going out and doing it. That's still what I think is we are hearing to my left too, what we thought when we passed it. Added it for clarification.
I understood we weren't changing anything. It was already a
Right.
law and we weren't changing nothing. That's
And we
why I
didn't.
voted for
We
it.
didn't, and code enforcement currently follows the law, and they have always followed the law, and they reach out to the property owners, and in most cases, the property owners do just enough in order to meet the requirements
Correct.
that code enforcement places upon them. So this funding will give an account, will give resources to code enforcement if we get to a point in a property where the owner is unresponsive, and that property will be brought to the council for the council to authorize code enforcement to take it to the next level to actually declare the property and move forward with the legal process, which is what that funding is to support. So it's not, code enforcement is not gonna go out and begin this process without first bringing the property to the attention of the council and getting the council's blessing to move forward with the legal process to get the property taken care of.
The
Before we
problem
go-
I had with the entire language, even though it's in state statute, is that it was very ambiguous in some areas. For example, somebody's lawn's too high. That was in the statute. I'm like,
So I'm just going to jump in because this is what you want me to do, is before we go down the rabbit hole of relitigating an agenda item in past council, I mean, the issue is around the budget. There's $12,000 in there for this process, and that can certainly be discussed, whether you want that to stay in there, if somebody wants it to be removed, we can do that, but we'll be here all night if we revisit that topic.
Yeah, it seems that way. Well, you got a half hour, it's 8 o'clock witching hour, so smoke it.
I'm just trying to keep us on focus. If you want to talk about the item, we can. Do we have any projections about fund balance? Where do we stand with the current spend?
So yes, I have and I want to preface this with saying it's a very, very preliminary and rough estimate. But I went through the year-to-date budgets, line item by line item, and pulled out all of the current surpluses, looked at all of the current line items that are already in the negative. And then I put together, I totaled all the surplus up, took away all the negative budgets, because obviously we have to cover those with the surplus, and came up with a dollar figure. I reached out to all the department heads and asked them to do the very same thing within their own budgets. And I forwarded them a year-to-date budget and asked them to go line item by line item and look at their current spending, project what their spending was going to be through the remainder of the fiscal year, and give me some idea of, again, a very rough estimate ballpark as to what they are expecting their funding to look like at the end of the year, whether it's going to be a surplus or an overture. I mean, we already have some departments that are already in the red, so. So through that process and received information from all of the department heads on spending that outstanding spending that they have, currently in place, bills that they're expecting to come in, expenditures that they know are coming up in the next few weeks. Like, I'll use highway for an example, because It's one of the larger departments, and a lot of those current, if you look at their year-to-date budget, you see lots of money out there. But in speaking with Lisa, most of that money is accounted for over the next 5 to 6 weeks, whether it be the striping is one of the ones that's currently being done. Calcium, or the liquid calcium that's currently being done. So those line items are gonna be expended. There's also, the salt is a very big line item that looks like a large sum of money. It's $107,000 unspent because we had a much more mild than usual winter. But then if you look 2 lines above that, you've got $80,000 overture in vehicle maintenance. So it's gonna cancel that out. So that's the process that we went through, that I went through with the individual department heads to figure out where we're likely to be in a ballpark figure at the end of the year. So what we came up with again, a possible surplus of $186,569 is a very rough estimate of what type of money we're looking at having left over from all the different line items in the departments of unspent funds. And many of it, the majority of it's coming out of training accounts, travel accounts, conferences and things that were all suspended and didn't happen due to COVID or training. A lot of it, went online, so there wasn't, the expense incurred for that. Like gasoline was another one, and in the police department, gasoline, we're like 20,000 surplus in gasoline because the gas price over last year was considerably less than it had been in previous years. So those are the types of accounts that were typical to have surpluses when we went through.
Gas will be wiped out soon. It's already doubled, so.
So, I'm confident in saying that number is going to be, that we're gonna be in that ballpark. But, any one department's, one major, highways, one major breakdown away from eclipsing a significant portion of that potential surplus, so.
Any thoughts?
Just, I, for some reason, thought it would be more than that, and that's really insignificant, like you said. It could be one breakdown away from, so there really isn't anything to carry forward, so to speak.
I think,
But that helps.
what you'll find is, and, in answer to your expectation, is last year, if you remember, the manager had all the department heads go back through their budget and a lot of the
I did, yeah.
excess,
Now that you say that, you remember.
was cut out of those budgets in an effort to, to keep that overall operating cost down. And so that, I think, is, has resulted in less surplus than what might have been otherwise. If we had budgeted a normal year and not made some, concessions expecting things to be less because of COVID, we probably would be looking at a larger dollar figure. But
Yep.
because of that, I think it's less than one might expect.
But also, I think that's a good thing. I think
Yeah.
being able to project and with all the variables, but being able to come in close to what you're budgeting means that that's a good stewardship of taxpayer resources.
And I think back to that Colwell diesel thing with that bill that was so unexpected, and that's exactly why we need that.
So, okay. Social service community requests. We had the presentation, the managers submitted recommendations in terms of funding. Any reaction in terms of, does anyone feel strongly one way or the other about funding any of those projects or requests?
we looking at?
Yeah, there's a combination.
Seven,
Yeah, there were a
four?
couple of pages. There's social service requests, and then there are some
Right.
community requests. So it's just kind of lumping them all together.
I have a question. The Heart of Ellsworth, last year was 0, and this year $5,000 has been proposed. And as I listened to their presentation, I kept thinking that,
What's the other section?
isn't that a
Sorry.
replication of the Chamber of Commerce? I didn't see a whole lot of difference. What they were doing was any different than the Chamber of Commerce.
Seven dash 4 is one, and then, you said section 4?
I'm sorry, what section for?
Oh, it's 4-55. So 4-55 and 7-4. One, so, Council Blanchard, I don't know if everybody was kind of looking, so do you want to just restate that so we don't miss your?
Yeah, Heart of Ellsworth, last year, the FY21 budget, $0, and now all of a sudden, this year, $5,000. As I listened to their presentation, I didn't hear much different from what they do versus the Chamber of Commerce, to which we give $10,000. And so what's the need for the $5,000?
So, just for clarity on all of these outside agencies, we just brought forward their request. So these don't reflect
Okay,
the city manager's opinion, or we just brought forward their request to provide them the opportunity to address the council. So that was their request. My recollection is flowers and lights.
I mean, they have
Yes.
a handout 2 pages later that explains it in detail there. Yeah, and it's lights, flowers, their Zoom programs at noon that they were doing for the businesses.
I just, personally, I don't see the need for $5,000 expenditure
I would agree.
to them. I think it's a replication. If they want to carry out a Zoom program as part of their programming, then that's fine, let them. I don't think that the taxpayer needs to be footing part of that bill.
I mean, they can make donations to them if they wanted to, right? I mean,
I mean, to me, there's a lot more needy organizations in here.
Well, to that point, the one area that I did want to raise of funding, the pandemic certainly has exacerbated a major problem that we have in this community, every community, around access to food insecurity, and just wondering if we should consider, with loaves and fishes, the request is 3,000. In previous years, it's been 5,000, and I think the demand this year is much higher. We heard the presentation. So it's one consideration that I wanted to put out there, is wondering if we should support something that's local and meets that kind of a need for our residents. Loaves and fishes,
That's a good, yeah.
because they, when they presented, I forget the exact numbers, but
43% of the
Yeah.
residents.
it's 43%, so it's,
Yeah.
And $500 to Life Flight of Maine,
Yeah, why is that?
that's what I'd like to know.
$18,000 a flight, and they need $500 from us?
Okay, that's gone. Scratch
Well, I
that.
think they ask every year,
Yeah,
they've
they
never
do.
approved it.
Right.
Yeah,
and that's where I would move those, personally, I would move that into loaves and fishes of that local,
Loaves and
Entity
Fishes
of-
does well, and it's well needed. I
Yes,
think if I'm
they
gonna
do.
spend money, I'd rather spend it there, I'd give them a 5.
And also Friends in Action, they do a lot of strong
Yes.
work.
Yes.
I would like to propose that we keep them the same as the prior year, so, the funding levels.
Loaves and Fishes?
Well, all of them. So,
oh, I see what you're saying.
we had a new one, Union Salmon Federation for 5,000. The Stanwood Life,
Yeah, I was gonna say-
Wildlife Sanctuary for 1,000. We did not fund those in the prior years.
Yeah, I don't know why we're doing the salmon.
What's that?
Your place, the ones that ask for $500.
Your place, yeah, that's a new organization as well.
Right.
But I think I would like to see us fund that.
What about that Families First?
They do,
Yeah.
For 1,000.
But we budgeted 1,000 last year.
yeah.
They
as
didn't
well.
give them anything last year, right?
We didn't because they had to be up.
Right.
Fully operational.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we budgeted
Yeah.
it, so.
Oh, you did, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a decent,
So we're okay there.
it's a decent operation. So Life Flight goes, your place goes,
Union,
Loaves and Fishes goes back to 5.
So we're taking your place out.
Hmm?
You wanna take your place out?
Where is?
And
nobody was here to present, right?
No, they
No,
won't.
they were
No,
here.
she did.
Were they here?
They're a new organization, well, restarting, we're looking for money for signage.
I think so.
So put that as a question mark? You want to keep it in?
I'd like to keep it.
Okay, so,
Okay, so what,
so Council Grindle suggested, funding at the same level as last year. Councilor Miller would like us to consider the Your Place. So all the ones that were increased would go back to, the previous year. Life Flight is out.
yes,
Your Place, Councilor Miller would like to keep that in.
keep it.
So keep that in, and then when you go back to the community requests, you're saying the same there?
Yes.
So, Stanwood Wildlife Sanctuary would be out. They requested 1,000, and last year it was 0. Does anybody?
And the salmon disappears,
And the Union Salmon Federation would
they
be
swim away.
out.
And Heart of Ellsworth is out.
Heart of Ellsworth would be out based on there was no funding last year. I would like to raise the question though around the items, the beautification items that are not done by anyone else.
Right.
And it seems like that's worth,
And we have funded them in the past, we just didn't fund them last year, and I think they might have not requested due to COVID. But we have funded them in the fiscal year 20 and 19.
Yeah, but they were doing the parade then.
Right.
Yes, that was part of the plan.
That was,
Yes, they did.
19.
it was a parade.
It was
right.
the funding, the 5,000.
Was
My
for the parade.
recollection of last year was the $5,000 was,
For the parade,
specifically
correct,
for the
that was the
parade.
argument.
and they said they weren't gonna do the parade, which was the motivation behind last year, by
To 0.
giving them 0, and the 5,000 was sent to the Recreation Commission to be able to fund the parade.
Correct.
So, that's my recollection of that process, but.
So this year they're buying decorations, you think we ought to give some for that?
I think we should, it's both
They're
downtown
offer
and it's also the
decorations.
lights.
Yeah, doing some,
So,
They-
some of the
Oh,
stuff.
no, go ahead.
if I hear beautification, and so that would be 2,500. Are we able to say that that's what we want it to go towards, or we can't, can we?
Right.
No.
You're gonna give them the money with that intent. Kinda goes in the big pot, and they stir it and goes somewhere.
You know, before we decide on the beautification money, I'd like to know, we pay Snuffy and Dollar Crawford money to do the Esplanade on High Street, both sides of the street. And they also do the park up at the corner. What would they charge to do the bridge? I have to admit, I've never seen anyone with a greener thumb than Dollar Crawford. And I think it would be worth asking them. And also the same thing to ask them down, what's the used clothing store on Water Street? Next to the old Ellsworth American building. Yes. Right next door to them, there was a garden area adjacent to the sidewalk that we have done flowers in for many years, and all of a sudden, 2-3 years ago, it went to hell, and it's just a bunch of weeds now. I don't know who was doing it. I believe the city was, but it looks awful. And to include, it's just a small area, probably half the size of this table.
So if we can get some of that information before the next meeting, we will be able to decide
Correct.
on this funding as it relates to that issue.
Yeah.
I think before I want a flower garden, I want Water Street paved.
Yeah. Next meeting is the action on the budget, correct?
Yep.
Yes.
It's a lot easier to be prepped and know what you got for values, rather than,
Oh, I know, that this is where the dollar amount
Is the
is,
free clinic?
and that's part of what we're sitting here tonight, is to make a decision on that with what we have in front of us, unfortunately.
so does anybody propose for that line item?
Which one, Heart of Ellsworth?
I propose we nix it.
What's that?
I'd nix it.
Well,
Yeah, so
I'd
would
say
I.
we
Who's
give
it?
at least half, 2,500.
Yeah.
Hmm.
2,500, what do you say?
They got pitched.
That's fine.
Shot down again.
Wait,
I'll be
that's-
all right.
We didn't fund them last
So-
year.
I would like to specify that it goes to beautification, but I can't, so.
Council Blanchett, what do you recommend?
Nix them.
Okay. Council Phillips?
Well, I thought 25, but if I'm in the minority, I'll live with that.
Nix it.
Boy, Gene.
So, it's,
Nix.
All right, they're out of there.
well, it's actually, no, who said, no, Council Phillips said yes, so it's actually, it stays. There's 4-3 at this
You
point.
did say at 25? You came up with another vote?
Well, you said yes.
Yes.
Council Grindle said yes.
No
Council Miller
kidding.
said yes.
No kidding, Heather, you said yes? I can't wait to
Okay.
be here
It's
next
just
year.
for
with you.
Howard Elder.
All right,
So
so
I'm gonna give it
that
to you as a public
addresses
hearing.
the social service community requests.
You-
The last part is just general, are there other items that have been presented to us from the department budgets that anybody wanted to revisit, had concerns with?
And all the new ones are not.
You
I
want me to
know,
go
all
through my list?
right.
Go
Here's
right ahead.
here's the point of the agenda. Everybody sit back.
It could be
Counselor
quick.
Grindle,
I'm sure they've
go
already
through your
done it.
tabs.
It's just,
Go right
I
ahead.
just had to go.
No, seriously.
No, you
All
should
right,
go.
so-
Just walk through all of them.
Finance, we're gonna increase salaries a little bit,
And
That's included in-
Professional services for the audit.
yes,
We did both of those.
Okay.
okay.
And that's
Um,
included in the update you got.
Hit it, okay.
Maybe Jen, you wanna tell them what changes you made? That might answer some of the
So
questions.
we added Dwight's retirement to code because that wasn't in there. the 12,000 that we already talked about for code ordinance. That change did reflect 50,000 to the library, because we wanted to look at that. We had mentioned that before, so that's in there. We adjusted finance payroll, increased professional services. We increased main purse, cafeteria plan, and RHS. Those were all underfunded. And then adjusted fire payroll to add the new fire chief and increased their professional services line for the EMS contract.
Tab
Answer
two.
any of your tabs?
It did.
Tab two.
Just two?
Keep going. No, seriously, go through all.
Yeah, okay. So in community-owned broadband infrastructure, there was a question whether TIF funds could be used for the fiber mapping programming.
I do not have that answer.
I don't know either.
Because that was 14,500. Or 14,000 in addition. Joint office services, we said a possible reduction in printing and advertising.
Is that Jana?
No, for joint services, that's for like everybody, for using the postage machine.
Because I think it was, we were consistently coming under budget on that one.
Yeah, I do think, because it went up, I remember it was last year, the year before, they increased it quite a bit, and I think we've kind of taken down roughly 10.
Yeah, okay. That was good. We added that.
She's getting
You
there.
got 13 minutes.
I'm going, all right?
Oh,
We
do we have
talked
to be
about
done
the-
by a special time?
We talked about the fitness stipend and the fire department carry forward on that one, I don't know.
Yeah, so, we utilized some of that money for, the funeral services for, Captain, Chief Deputy Dorr. But, there's still a very significant amount. We're currently in contract negotiations with the fire department. The last 2 years, they, because of the contract negotiations, they hadn't, they didn't actually perform any, they didn't perform any test, right? So that's why there was no expenditure, so that's why that money. So
Okay.
the, if we encumber those funds, that will cover FY22's expected costs for that program. I expect that we made some changes in the contract, and I expect that we're gonna sign that, hopefully sign that contract, and then the program will be effective again. But the last 2 years, they haven't done it, which is why it's there.
Okay. I had a note on streetlights, the LED conversion was being discussed, and I can't remember whether we were gonna
Yeah, I don't have any
increase that.
hard
or-
figures on that, other than to just know that we've been told that it will reduce the cost, but I really don't know anything on specifics on that.
Okay.
If I recall past conversations, though, it would reduce it, it was fairly significant.
It is, yeah. But it's not something we're gonna get accomplished, well, we could potentially get accomplished in this fiscal year, but I'd hate to ravage the account and then have, not be able to pull it off, because we don't.
And realistically, the way supply chain is right now, you may not.
Right.
You can't buy virtually anything that you need, so it may not be until the COVID bump is done.
But we are gonna pursue that, and hopefully we will get that conversion done, and that savings, we'll realize that savings.
Who's on the streetlight committee? You deal with?
No.
Oh, now that Gary's gone, I mean,
It's you and I, isn't it?
I think it's Councilor Blanchett.
holy smokes.
Yeah, I'm one of them.
Well, how is, then tell us, how is that coming along? Oh,
Wait, it's just me?
You're on all the committees that nobody wanted to be on, so.
Did you miss that meeting?
Apparently I did.
So what was your decision?
Recreation, so some of the budgets in there for FY21 were zero. Which I think because of COVID and all of that, so I get that part, but, wondering what everybody's thought is on going back to the FY20 amounts,
What page you
8-6.
8-6? Oh. Oh.
So, I did meet with Nick from the grant, because many of those zeros reflect the grant, because they're, a lot of their programming, Shakespeare in the Park. We've nixed Shakespeare in the Park early on, and the summer concert series. And the reason we decided not to go forward with the summer concert series is they would have started booking entertainers like probably 6 weeks ago or more when we had this conversation, and they prepay those entertainers when they book them. So I didn't want to get into a situation where we had all these concerts essentially paid for and then have COVID not allow us to have them, and then we're trying to track people down to recoup our loss or schedule them for next year. So the conversation that Nick and I had was, let's just suspend the concert series again for this summer, but perhaps leave some of the funding there for them to be able to throw, having not a series, but just maybe 2 or 3 individual performances. So it certainly wouldn't require the full 6,500, but if we left some funds available for them to, let's say, hold a concert in August or something, just to keep some activity at the waterfront once we are confident in the level of, freedom from COVID, so.
Does this mean $3,000 like 2 years ago?
Yeah.
Yep.
Put
Okay.
that to 3,000.
And what about, so the Shakespeare in the Park, you said to bring to zero?
Yeah,
There goes to zero, Shakespeare.
yeah.
Good night,
We're not-
Shakespeare.
He's not gonna do that this year.
Party in
So-
such sweet
To
sorrow.
be or not to be?
Let me just raise, and I don't know if 6,500 is the right number, it might be less. One of the things that I think would be nice to be able to do in the community, and I think Nick would probably be amenable to this, is if we leave those dollars in there, to have something at the end of summer, before fall, some sort of community
S'more festival?
picnic, something that just brings the community together around, it's been a tough year, and it would be nice to have some sort of community event that could kind of be throughout the day for kids, for adults, and
I suggest a masked bonfire.
Yes, some more festival.
fireworks.
No, just a bonfire. Everyone throws a mask.
Burn boats.
Yes, we do.
Years
We're
ago.
voting with money for
And
fireworks.
where we get the firewood, right next to you.
So I would just raise that as something that would be,
Haven't you got a chainsaw?
especially after everything that everybody's been through, that it might just be a nice community event. And let Nick use his talents to put something together.
I agree with that.
I did notice that parade and lighting is on here. I thought that was the heart of Ellsworth.
The parade
No,
moved.
No,
Recreation last year.
Yeah, yeah,
that was
that's what happened to
specific
Howard Ellsworth.
lighting for the Heart of Ellsworth. It was in
Okay,
that.
but it's also under social services, right? Or they do other?
No, the Heart of Ellsworth got clipped, which was what we thought we were doing.
So what is the lighting expense if they're doing it?
So,
I don't know
That's a
what
good
that
point.
lighting expense is.
You mean half, that second thing, the lighting part of
think it
the
was just
parade
the
and
parade.
lighting.
Yeah, it was just parade.
I think it's just parade.
Yeah, the rec committee didn't handle the lights.
No.
The Heart of Ellsworth put the lights up. They contract with
Oh, yes.
Wallace
Wallace.
to put them up, but that's, the Heart of Ellsworth does all of that. And they purchase new lights, and so I think that's just I don't think it was all parade for
That's what the
the rec committee.
2,500 was for them.
Was the ice rink set up this winter?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was, okay.
Did it ever freeze?
The only time it ever did freeze.
Couple
Usually
hours-
this is a
couple
bowl of
hours one
water.
night in January, or?
Better this year than.
Some Friday afternoon.
Put it back up for this weekend.
I think every time I went by it, it was frozen.
All right, so are we going, Shakespeare in the Park goes to zero.
Yep.
The programming for the grand, do you want 7,500 or you want 10,000? You think
Programming
that
for the grand.
if we go 10,000, would that include that portion that you're talking
Good.
about?
Good, I think we would need to talk.
Where'd we end up with the, it's staying at 10 for the grand? Or it's going to 75?
Why-
That's what I'm asking,
why
I
would-
don't know,
Why would we increase it?
for the community celebration.
There's
Well, I thought that was we would use some of the money on the summer
Concert?
concerts.
Okay.
For what Dale was talking about.
Okay. So do you want to go 0, 7,500, 2,500, 3,000?
On the programming?
And they also have a new line for 8,000.
Right, and that would go to 0.
So the programming just went back to 7,500?
I thought
Yeah.
it went back to zero.
No.
So-
Programming,
So Shakespeare in the Park would go to 0.
0.
Programming would go to 7,500.
Yep.
Okay.
Vacation movies would go to 2,500. Summer concerts would go to 3,000.
Yeah.
And educational programs would go to 0.
What educational programs were they gonna have? No idea, or?
He has a lot of educational programs he does with kids, and I think we should give him some, I don't think we should give him 0. He does a lot with
Right.
kids
Oh,
for
I know,
educational
he
programs.
does, yeah.
There's no way we should not give him any money for that. He's really
Okay.
doing a lot.
Hey, when I
for
was a
kids.
little kid,
How
you
much
wouldn't
money?
believe how many
I would give
days
him
I spent at the
8,000.
Grand watching
That's what he
movies,
wants to use, and I think he can use it wisely.
school vacations
Leave
and
him-
stuff.
So will he
So
be able
Bob,
to
you're
have
saying
all
give
the-
him the 8?
Yes,
Leave the 8?
that's what I said.
All right.
It's a good
Anybody?
organization, yeah, and he's had a hell
I
of a
say it's
year.
good to
He's doing a
keep
hell of a
something
job.
going there.
And he'll be able to have those activities this summer?
Yep.
Yes, he is.
Okay.
My daughter signed up.
Okay.
So, everybody,
Oh, well.
consensus?
I
Yes,
think-
Leave it at 8?
Oh.
Hopefully he'll do something good, and
Okay.
they will, and
All right.
What happened to Ellsworth Under the Stars? Are they not
I like
doing
his
it this year?
enthusiasm.
Is that the movies?
Yeah,
Crickets. We've never heard a word, so I'm assuming
wow.
It's probably because of COVID.
COVID, yeah. They never came back, so.
And the black flies.
Good.
All right.
Well, that was fun.
Everybody good with those? City Hall, we talked about reducing the power.
I have one
Whoops.
more, recreational activities.
As the winter carnival,
Okay, thank you.
we haven't had winter,
Have we had one?
not in a couple of years, we haven't had winter for a while.
That's what I'm saying.
But if winter comes back, we will have a carnival.
Yeah, okay. We can just carry
Well,
forward.
I hope it
the-
snows
do we
10 feet
Carry
just for
forward the
all
money you
you
didn't
guys.
spend for last year.
Right, so the money that,
They didn't have it budgeted last year.
See, that
Zero
worked out well.
last year.
No wonder, no budget. Is that premonition?
okay.
It was COVID.
COVID,
So-
oh. Besides, there wasn't any winter, so it kind of worked out
Would
well.
it be fair to say that it was originally budgeted, but then stripped? The,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Rick?
we took it out because it was COVID.
Okay.
We weren't gonna have anything.
Okay. So what did you have, city buildings now?
Under power, I had possibly reduce it to 45,000, because I think we were under.
Yeah, so actually,
overfunding.
Steve, in his response to my request, he said, we'll probably have some left in the power line. So I would
And
say
that's-
that, yes, we could probably reduce that. I don't,
By 10?
yeah, I've got, my notes is,
Yeah.
between 5 and
where
10.
we are right now with it.
I like 10.
Past history, 10 ought to do it.
Yeah.
Are you in the tabs?
I am.
No. Really?
Yes.
Go ahead, so that became 45,000?
Yes.
Perfect. That's the end of your tabs?
That's the end of my tabs.
Good, that was great. Hey,
Look
have
at, she did
look
it
at the
just in
clock.
time.
Yeah.
Bingo!
Right on the dot.
2-hour budget meeting. God, you're good. So Jen, was that all clear as mud? Perfect. So, okay, then instant fee, what's the mill rate down to, 18?
But I do think we should note, and we'll talk about it obviously with the meeting, but, I don't know if I can find the right sheet. So, as the budget, and we've made some changes here tonight, but as it currently stands, last year's mill rate was 18.77. FY20, it was 18.81, and currently, without taking into account anything we've talked about tonight, is at 18.7. So it's a slight decrease from last year.
It's gonna be even more, I can feel it.
And I think, based on, this is to you, the city manager, in terms of where we have all been as a community, to be able to keep that in check is a pretty significant accomplishment. At the same time, there are a lot of things that are going to get addressed that we haven't addressed for a while in this budget that will put taxpayer money to good use. So I think it's a pretty good budget, fair budget, and one that will move some projects forward.
From the Bangor Daily.
One last question, the assessment, is that from Larry?
Yes.
That's up to date, that amount that he has in there?
The last estimate.
What? Okay.
Yeah.
Not the solid.
Maybe you're one of the 8,571 homes of business? Yeah.
And I did speak to Larry, and he explained to me that that process unfortunately won't be complete until the day of commitment, which is usually the 15th. And he, based on, he's very intuitive, pays close attention to the market, and based on the, recent but now prolonged surge in home buying and property valuations, he's anticipating potentially somewhere in a 5% range of an increase in the valuation value. And, he still has some work to do. He's currently in the process of going out and inspecting new construction, assessing new construction. So that's where he's at in the process. And right now, he usually runs about a 93% accuracy from his assessed value to the market value. So he's relatively accurate, and he intends to maintain that accuracy. And in order to do that, he feels he's going to have to do, again, probably about a 5% increase in order to account for this recent surge in home and property sales.
Are you
So
saying
you-
5% increase in value
Yes.
on everybody's house?
Which is basically gonna raise everybody's taxes no matter what we do.
It'll lower the mill rate.
Just because a bunch of people are coming up and buying properties.
Well, it raised, but those bunch of people coming up and buying properties raises the value of everyone's property.
Yeah, but
So-
next year the value's gonna go back down, but I've never seen the price or the value of the taxes go back down.
That's up to us.
But
And again,
the
this is a.
percentage of the market value, I'm saying.
This is a preliminary conversation with Larry based on he's audited every year. And if he doesn't adjust according to the market, then he's gonna get hammered on his audit, on the opposite side, on the other side. So if he doesn't make any adjustment and the market value through his audit process comes in and puts him at 70% or something, then he's gonna have to make it up in the next year significantly more. So it's critical that
I just
he
think,
maintains.
somebody who's owned their home for 20 years and maybe they're elderly and on a fixed income, cost of everything else is going up, and then just because the market's gone up, their property tax goes up and up and up until the point they can't even
Well, I
afford it.
think.
The property value.
The value
Did
will
the-
go up, but
the
we adjust
va-
the mill rate to compensate, hopefully.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as the assessment, the city's assessment of property, that is what it is. That doesn't change unless there's a formal reassessment of properties throughout
Yes,
the
it does.
community. It's the mill rate that drives the,
It's the mill rate that drives it, but the property values, the assessed value is controlled by Larry. Whether we do a reassessment or not, he adds 5%, or it goes up another, for whatever it is. So everyone's house, all of a sudden, in his eyes, is worth more money. So we, of course, obviously, we adjust the mill rate and try to compensate for the pain.
so that gets adjusted annually?
Down, down, down.
Yeah, and that will be in our final figures, but to come up with a final mill rate. But right now, that's what he's contemplating looking at based on market value. And if he doesn't respond to the market value and make any adjustment, then if this is if this isn't just a short-lived experience, then we're gonna be lagging way behind in our property values.
I guess the offsetting factor in that, maybe this is why I'm not picking up on it, but if there are more, as more properties are built and construction, you may see that levels it out somewhat in terms of the overall impact, because the mill rate, if you have more people, more value, more people paying in, it lessens it, so. It's a big picture that we've got, yeah. But we're not gonna have the complete forecast.
No. And again, it's speculation at this point, but that's where his thought process is.
Is there any way to get a census of other community, I mean, all the other communities are going through the same thing along the coast in Maine?
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm sure, Larry doesn't exist in a vacuum,
Right.
so I'm sure he's, I'm sure as part of this process, he's communicating with all the other assessors around. In fact, Brewer and Bar Harbor assessors both worked under him, so. So he, he has open lines of communication, and he's actually a member of some larger assessing, affiliated organization, so, so, yeah, this isn't just him
No.
arbitrarily saying, oh, I think we need to react to this. This is what he's,
Right, but
what-
it is a really large swing in property prices and people coming up here, and, I mean, the 5% is nothing compared to what people are getting paid for the increase in the price of their houses that they're selling them for. So it's kind of an anomaly, so
Correct.
in that, I know that you don't react to that exact percentage increase, so is the 5% in the range of what it should be, I guess is my question, if that made any sense. I know I went around.
Well, so maybe we can, I think we should have Larry at the meeting to talk about this.
I'm really surprised they didn't hire.
Well, I think, and I think he's being very cautious about the fact that, it could be a short-lived situation. It may not be prolonged, but the reality is that there doesn't appear to be any end in sight. And the property values and that people are selling their homes for are driving up the cost of everything. It's difficult to hire any sort of contractor to build a home because they're all booked out. The modular places are telling you 2 years out before you're going to be able to get a home. So there doesn't appear to be, by all accounts, any, slowdown in sight. So for him and for us as a community not to take any action moving forward would, again, down the road, is gonna put us in a position where our evaluations are ridiculously low compared to the value, and Larry takes his job very serious and takes his reputation and his ability to be able to maintain that high level of comparison in his audit of percentage very serious, so.
Once upon a time, they used to keep the value at what you bought it for eons, and it didn't change every year. And I don't know when they decided to say it has to go with the current market value, because market price of your house is only as good as what somebody's willing to pay, but if you're not willing to sell, it's not worth anything to them.
They're willing to pay this year.
Yes, but are you willing to sell, right?
No, I'm not selling. I have to build something else.
I just don't think it's
He's
fair to
worried
the
about having
average
fresh
Joe.
water straight in front of him.
All right, well, thank you for enduring these many meetings.
This is so much fun.
We will have a budget one way or the other in June.
Hey, you can give up bicycling.
Meeting is adjourned.
You may not be able to get a builder, but if you need concrete,